All right, so we'll go on and move on to Kevin in Wisconsin.
Good choice.
And wants to talk about justification atheists have for the uniformity of nature. MDs, it sounds like you like this, so start off the conversation between you two. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. Yeah, and basically we can even broaden that out to just any of the things necessary that you appeal to perform the scientific method, like logic or reason or any of these things.
So your question is, how do we justify it?
Mm-hmm. How do you justify the things necessary for science itself?
Yeah, you don't. So you take it as an axiom, as an assumption that you make in order to do the work that you need to do, right? So yes, this is accurate. We don't actually know what, for instance, physics is like on the other side of the galaxy. We make an assumption that things work roughly the same in the universe, and that's an assumption. But that's what we got, you know. If you're going to challenge that, which is fair, you also are, again, you're sort of going down the solipsistic rabbit hole, I think, right? It's like, well, if you can't rely on those, if you can't rely on reason, how do you know anything? If you can't rely on like your perception, how do you know that you're not a, you know, brain in a vat sort of situation? And so you sort of go down a solipsistic rabbit hole, but like from a scientific perspective, yeah, there are absolutely assumptions that you make, and you just have to be okay with that.
Gotcha. So you're okay with unjustified assumptions?
No, well, okay. So I am okay with assumption, the minimum number of assumptions required to be able to make progress in you know, thinking about or finding something about a topic. Yeah, because you have to, because otherwise you're just, like I said, you're like in a solipsistic thing where you're like, well, I can't know that anyone else exists except for my own mind, so I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. Because otherwise, I would just be assuming.
Well, the questions about if those assumptions are justified by your worldview.
Axioms aren't justified.
Yeah, axioms aren't justified.
That's what it means to be an axiom. People make this like weird rhetorical move, like this is like a gotcha, but that's what it means to be an axiom, right? It's not justified. That's what it means.
Yeah.
So if you're just gonna make a trivial claim like, oh, so these axioms aren't justified, like, yeah, that's what it means analytically to be an axiom.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So it's an internal critique, because now what standard are you going to use to delineate between what axioms people can hold and they can't hold, that you're going to challenge and that aren't going to be challenged?
Sorry, go ahead, BMD.
No, go ahead, Jimmy.
Mine's going to be based on experience. I mean, it seems like constitutive of experience that like I can derive the laws of logic, but I'm not going to hold the like classical axioms of logic necessarily. I kind of do in the sake of what my interlocutor accepts. I mean, my view is a little different. I'm like borderline epistemic error theorist, so I have like a different kind of view on a lot of things, but that's still something I'd be navigating. But my kind of critique is that you can start with experience. It seems that you can derive identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. I mean, there's arguments that you presuppose it. I have a buddy who holds the position that's actually just derivable from experience. And so he argues that position. I'm somewhat sympathetic to it, but I don't know if it ultimately succeeds in that sense. But I mean, I'm kind of curious. So like, if we agree that you kind of start with these axioms, what axiom do you start with? Because I want to see how you would get out of presumably a problem that you think we have.
Yeah, so I don't agree you can just choose arbitrarily unjustified axioms. And that's the critique I'm making.
Yeah, it's not doxastic voluntarism. It's not a choice. This is what you're convinced by.
Okay, so it's just mechanistic?
I mean, I don't know, MD, I don't know your position on it. I'm just saying it's not by choice. You don't choose things, right?
I think this is like an Occam's razor thing where you make the minimum number of assumptions necessary to do whatever you need to do, right? It's like, so for the scientific method, we hold axioms that, for instance, if we want to draw conclusions about how things work, generally speaking, we assume that, your specific sample that you're working with is going to be a representative thing, right? And sometimes you have to justify that, right? If you're doing like statistics, or for example, or epidemiology, then you need to justify that the sample you're looking at is actually representative of the broader population. If you're talking about physics, there are certain like physical limitations, right? Like we can't go to the other side of the galaxy to see if, physics acts the same way here as it does there. And then there are axioms for specific things that you need to do in mathematics. And I'm not a mathematician, so I won't assume to know like all the details of that, but they have their own axioms, right? And so I guess the point I'm making is that you try to make the fewest number of you try to take the fewest number of axioms you can to make progress in whatever field you're doing. And I think when you go to the point of positing the existence of an additional entity, which I think is where we're ultimately headed with like these sort of like theistic arguments, then that's like one place where I draw the line, although I have many other lines that I draw. And like when I review scientific papers that people are trying to publish, I question some of the axioms that they hold in their scientific paper, right? So there's lots of axioms that we question.
So what's
but
the
the bottom line is
line
you
about what
make the
axioms
fewest
that
number of
don't
assumptions
accept?
that you need to do the thing that you want to do.
Kevin, are you?
So it's
are,
all just pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it's pragmatic. At least
Yeah.
I think it is. I'm
Okay, 'cause I'm asking what
happy
the
to be
epistemic,
judged.
like,
I'm happy to be
indicator is
proven
gonna be.
wrong.
What's the
Yeah,
question?
so this is just going to result in relativism.
Okay, great. So you have a claim, presumably, that do you take like a presuppositionalist approach that God is going to be the only thing that can ground like intelligibility of facts and things like that, logic? Is that your view?
So you said, okay, great, to me saying it's going to be a relativist, and then you don't want to go down that argument?
Well, I was responding what you were saying to MD. I was just saying that's fine. I'm curious on your view though, right? Because I think we've offered you pretty much everything that you can make your assessment on. But I'm curious if you ground it or if you start with different axioms. I'm curious on what those are. I mean, if you're unwilling to go through those, that's fine. We can do that another time. But I assume that you have some type of
I never said I'm
defeater for it.
unwilling. I just wanted to make sure you were okay with saying, okay, great, to the fact that I said that's going to result in relativism on the epistemic standard you just set forth. I just want to make sure you're okay with that and you agree that you think it's great and it's fine.
Oh, well, I was saying, look, I've already expressed my view being sympathetic to epistemic error theory. So I don't know what that's supposed to do to me, but so if you interpret okay, great to that, that's fine. I was saying okay, great in terms of when you were saying something, I was trying to ask you a question after MD. So I'm trying to ask you, do you actually take axioms like that start with God, or what do you take? Because presumably you're going to run into a similar issue.
I don't believe in unjustified. I don't believe that you can just assume unjustified things. You can think that if you're going to try to negate other people's truth claims, you're going to have some standard by which you negate them. And if your epistemic standard is just the fewest assumptions to do what you want to do, then you're going to result into relativism. So I reject classical foundationalism, that whole project itself. So yes, of course, I do believe that these transcendental things that you have to appeal to do science that you can't justify, like logic, reason, identity over time, all this stuff will be justified, of course, by the Orthodox Christian God. That's my view.
Great. So that sounds like a biconditional statement, right? Tell me if I'm wrong. You can only have intelligibility of things like transcendental categories like logic and math and things like that, morality, metaethics, whatever, if and only if the Christian God exists, right? Am I right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. So what's the argument? How do you derive that conclusion? You have to give me weeks. It seems like we both accept the same classical axioms of logic. So it seems like we can make progress here. And you can bring me to your view. So what's the argument?
Go ahead.
So the argument is a transcendental argument. So it's going to be, the form is X is the necessary condition of Y. We have Y, therefore X, and that's going to be, the short form of it is going to be that God is the necessary precondition for knowledge. We have knowledge, therefore God. The longer form of it, which I will keep short, won't go over every single thing, but that there's certain things that have to be the case for you to make knowledge claims. Knowledge presupposes a knower. So you're going to have to justify a self with the same identity over time. You're also going to have a standard by which you delineate truth and false statements, such as logic. This can't be some variable.
Yeah, so I'm not hearing an argument. I'm hearing you hold on. I'm hearing you bloviate. What's the argument, right? What's the premises?
I just gave you the argument. I gave you the short form. So the short
form I understand what I know what a transcendental argument is, right? How do you establish the conclusion? You're just saying, like, if I just reject the premise, you have to support, right? Why?
Like, give
why
us
is the case?
An if, then, therefore.
You reject the premise we have knowledge claims? Or that we have knowledge, sorry, you reject the premise that we have knowledge?
No. I'm asking you why this is going to be a necessary condition for Y, right? Or why is going to be a necessary condition for X?
Right? I was giving you my argumentation when you cut me off. There's certain things needed for knowledge. It presupposes a knower and a standard like logic or reason to evaluate and delineate truth claims.
Okay, I'm sorry. How does this reason? The first part I have an issue with presupposes a knower, so it presupposes a fundamental. Like, I mean, you said you deny foundationalism, but it presupposes that there's intentional states prior, like sans creation. That's what you're saying the view is?
No, I'm saying that knowledge presupposes that there's an agent that is doing the knowing and holds the knowledge itself.
That's just trivial. If you're going to say that you have to be an agent to like have a propositional attitude towards a proposition and accept and believe in that, sure, that's fine. How is that?
So how do you justify that?
No. If you're asking me a question, you're not understanding how presenting an argument works, right? So you have a claim that God. No,
you're cutting me off.
Yeah, you're not. You didn't give me premise one. You're just saying, hey, this thing presupposes. You told me something trivial, right? That knowledge presupposes there's an agent.
Knowledge.
Granted, right? That's great. That's awesome. So what's the actual
necessary condition for knowledge? Yeah, God is the necessary.
I never have to mute people on this show, right? If you don't have an argument, you're just telling me this is the necessary condition for that, right? I'm not seeing how you've established that, and all I'm asking you is how you establish that God is the necessary precondition. I haven't heard anything. I've just heard you just say there's these categories. God needs to. You just hear the statement of the claim. God needs to be the one that is foundationally required for them. Great. What's the argument for that? How do you actually derive that conclusion? Right? How do you know there aren't other necessary conditions for such a fact to obtain? Go ahead.
Do you want to just kick me off, or do you want me to actually give you the argument? Because just stating you're not making an argument doesn't make it the case. So if you,
I'm sorry. So what was the support for the premise?
Okay. Again,
I mean, if you want to suicide by mods, you can, but I'm trying to ask you to support it. Doesn't sound like you actually have an argument. Like, have you written down an argument? Do you?
Let him talk.
You're not letting me speak. You're literally not letting me speak, dude.
Go, Kevin. We're not talking. Go, Kevin.
Go ahead.
Okay. Are you going to cut me off as soon as I start?
Go. If you're going to ask me more questions, I will.
God is the necessary condition for knowledge. We have knowledge, therefore God. That's the short form of the argument.
Question.
My account for this.
I just have a question, Kevin. So I think Jmike's.
Cut me off.
What Jmike was asking. No. It's part of this. Jmike was asking how you justify that premise.
Yeah, I don't see how the consequent follows.
So justifying that God is a necessary condition for knowledge. That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, I'm asking you to support the premise. You're just saying you're giving a conditional statement, right?
Great,
yeah, you're giving a conditional statement.
You have to stop speaking. Okay. So I can do it. Here we go.
Okay.
Give me 30 seconds, okay? Here we go.
Ahead.
Bite your lip real hard. You can do this, man. So logic, a standard to derive truth claims, and a knower are some simple prerequisites necessary. I can account for this and justify this because Humans have an essence, a what to them, and a person, or the metaphysical aspect of them, the agent,
an
that
essence.
doesn't change type
Hold
over
on.
time. Logic is a transcendental category that we have access through our nous, which is the spiritual faculty of our heart, and logic itself is a created transcendental category created by God that we can communicate with through our spiritual energies.
That was enough word salad to end world hunger. Literally, it really was. So again, I'm gonna ask. Hold on. How does your view rule out Platonism? That actually that laws of logic are they're propositional and they're necessary entities that exist eternally. How do you rule out that view? Because if you're just saying, like, look, I'm familiar with the philosophical literature, not tremendously, but I do know that this idea that there's these transcendental categories like logic and knowledge, we have propositions that we can obtain and say, hey, that's true or false, or inferences we can make with logic. That's great. But this begs the question against the Platonist view, who thinks that propositions can't reduce to minds, right? Can't reduce to physical states of affairs. Thus, they're not going to reduce to a mind of God. They're going to be abstract objects that are propositions. If you're just saying that this accounts for it, you're begging the question against the Platonist view, right? You didn't establish that.
I've given you an account. It's not begging the question, first off. Secondly, Platonists, the Platonic forms themselves, you can only see particulars of them. You can't actually access the universal. So a triangle, the actual perfect form of a triangle, could be the moon spirit from Bloodborne. So you don't actually have knowledge of this. You can't actually access it.
I'm sorry, what? I didn't understand the point. You're saying...
Do you realize that Platonic forms, right? There's these perfect Platonic forms out there for all particular...
No, that's not what I'm saying with Platonism. That's not the Platonism. That's not the Platonism I'm talking about, right? I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Malpass or... yeah, I'm talking about, like, some people call it, like, small p Platonism. It's just the idea that there's abstract objects, right? They're going to say propositions, for example, don't reduce to states of affairs.
How do you interact with abstract objects? Hold
on.
How do you interact with them?
Jesus, if you're going to mute me. This isn't a view. This isn't necessarily a view that I hold. This is a view that I think has arguments for it that shouldn't be people have their bat an eye towards, as if like you should scoff at it. But if you have a view at which you do account for some type of quote unquote transcendental category, which would be logic, if you take laws of logic to be propositional and there's an argument that shows that they can't reduce to mental events because they invoke a vicious regression, or that they can't be states of affairs because propositions have an aboutness relation to they're about states of affairs, then it rules out your God entirely. It just does, right? And there's arguments that are given against like divine conceptualism by Alex Malpass and other people that show that these quote unquote like transcendental categories don't require a mind at all. They just require some type of abstract object. Now and we're going to bore the whole audience with the philosophy, so I want to move on. But I do want to say that until you can actually show, right, that they are required on a mind, and you don't have a defeater for why abstract objects couldn't necessarily do it, then you don't have the necessary entailment that in order to have logic or in order to have any set of intelligibility, that it's going to require God, because there's a competing view that doesn't invoke a mind and it thinks it does a good job. You didn't show that yours is only sufficient for that, right? Or necessary and sufficient for that. You did not show that, right? You just said it. That's all you did. You just were like, this is what I believe. And then I gave a bunch of word salad.
Quick.
Right. But
real quick. Just saying some people think they're right, that's not an argument. And second off,
yeah, I agree. And yours isn't an argument for the same reason.
You're on the show for a million hours. Can you let me talk for 30 seconds, then you can kick me off? Is that okay?
Yeah. I'll kick you off now. How about that? You can call me back next week because I'll be on.
We're running at I had enough of that words.
Yeah, look, so all I'm trying to drive on that point is that the idea that God is necessary for logic, there's views that don't agree with this, right? There's views that people who think that laws of logic are propositional, they don't reduce to minds, they don't reduce to states of affairs. And so you're rationally left with this other category of propositions. And if you take laws of logic, they're just going to say those are necessary existing propositions, and those are required for intelligibility. They didn't need to invoke a God. They can give the exact same type of form of your transcendental argument, right? And then just do away with the mind, show that this is the case, that you establish it in a different view, All I'm trying to do is give you a competing view on that. That's all I'm trying to do. That's it. Right.
Right, yeah.
You don't show that it's necessary because it's the fact that there could be necessary. There could be an alternative view that does also account for the thing you're looking for. Hence Platonism. Right.
Right. Like to me, and like I clearly don't have the philosophical chops that Jmike does, but like this whole thing seems to be smuggling in God into the same assumptions, right? It's like you're saying, oh, you guys are just assuming that the laws of logic are true. It's like, well, yeah, but your thing is assuming that the laws of logic are true, and
plus this mind and entity and
right
desires, very specific desires, and wants to love. You bake all this shit into your view. It makes it way more complicated.
Right, exactly. You can't just package all of that belief together and put it under one label and say, oh, I'm only assuming one thing, right? You're actually assuming all of the subcategories and properties of that thing. Like, for instance, even the ability to know something is like one of the things that he was harping about. It's like that is an assumption that's baked into that description. So, I mean, I think this is just like a case of smuggling something in under like a broader category.
Yeah, I mean, and the objection is just to say that you can assert that this is the necessary conditions, right? But it's really easy for someone else to do. And when you give an argument, and I could just reject that, I could just say, well, no, I think actually Platonism grounds it better, or actually Platonism is necessary, or some other view grounds it. We're just left with the same type of conditional statement, and the way that he filled it out doesn't seem to be like, I don't know. He went on about essences and spirit. I just reject that stuff out of hand. I just pull the cord on the bus stop, and I don't agree with you. I mean, it's trivial. The best thing that we can do, right, is any type of argument that you are presented. It's really easy for the theist or the atheist to just pull the cord and say, I don't actually accept that view, because it might beg the question, or it holds a proposition that you don't accept. So, like, of course, I don't accept essences, so I'm not going to get to the conclusion God part. Now, if that's the case, the best thing we can do is compare the view, right? And just look at, well, what's simpler? And on what you're saying in your view, let's just say they both explain the data. Like, we can just say that. If it's the case that we have this axiom plus all this extra stuff, like you're pointing out, why would we unnecessarily add intentional states or unnecessarily add this notion that God is loving, or essences or spirits? All of this, all it does is complicate your view so much more that I'm not really buying into this concept that this is what's required necessarily. I'm just buying into the fact that you've heard garbage presuppositionalist tactics from like Bahnsen and Van Til, and you just are regurgitating something that you are doing as damage control because you believed in Jesus, not for this. Notice that presuppositionalists, they don't mention Jesus, right? You don't have to presuppose Jesus. Jesus isn't even part of the game, right? It has nothing to do with the tactic.
Yeah.